The dress they put me in was too small on purpose. I knew this because my stepmother had smiled when she handed it to me, that particular curve of her lips that meant she had engineered something cruel. The fabric strained across my hips and pulled tight under my arms, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what she wanted everyone else to see. A woman who didn't fit. A woman who would never fit. The pale blue satin made my skin look sallow, and the cut was designed for someone 30 pounds lighter, someone with the kind of body my stepsisters had inherited from their mother, while I had inherited nothing but my father's debts and my dead mother's wide hips. "Perfect," my stepmother said from the doorway. She was already dressed in black silk, her grey hair swept into an elegant knot. At 62, Margaret Brennan still carried herself like the beauty she had once been. "You look exactly right." I didn't ask what she meant. I had learned years ago that asking Margaret questions only gave her more opportunities to sharpen her tongue against me. My father appeared behind her, and for one moment I thought I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. Patrick Brennan had been handsome once, charming once, successful once. Now he was none of those things. His construction company had collapsed under the weight of bad deals and worse decisions, and somewhere along the way, he had borrowed money from people who didn't accept late payments. "The car is here," he said. His voice was flat. "Remember what we discussed, Siobhan. You're to be pleasant, agreeable. Whatever they want from you tonight, you smile and you nod." "What do they want from me tonight?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be nothing good. Margaret laughed. It was not a kind sound. "What could anyone want from you? You're a gesture, dear. A symbol. Patrick owes the Morettis a great deal of money, and since we can't pay in cash, we're paying in flesh." She looked me up and down with something that might have been satisfaction. "Such as it is." I understood then, truly understood. I was being given away, traded, offered up like a sacrifice to appease gods my father had foolishly angered. And they had chosen me not because I had value, but because I had none. My stepsisters were beautiful and accomplished. They had futures. I was 27 years old, had spent the last decade cooking and cleaning for a family that treated me like a servant, and I had nothing to my name except a dead mother's wedding ring that I wore on a chain beneath my clothes. The car was black and expensive. The driver opened the door without looking at me, and I slid inside, followed by my father and stepmother. No one spoke during the drive. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows, and I watched them the way I had learned to watch everything in my life. Quietly, carefully, looking for patterns, looking for danger, looking for the small spaces where I might survive. The Moretti estate sat behind iron gates and a quarter-mile of private road. The house itself was old money-made stone, all columns and windows and manicured gardens that probably cost more to maintain each month than my father had made in his best year. There were other cars in the circular drive, other people moving toward the lit entrance, and I realized this was a party, a gathering. I was being delivered as entertainment for an audience. Inside, the foyer was marble and crystal, old paintings and fresh flowers. A man in a dark suit took our names and led us through corridors that smelled like money and something else. Something that might have been fear, if fear had a scent. The other guests we passed looked prosperous and careful, the kind of people who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. The main room was vast. Chandeliers scattered light across polished floors, and a string quartet played something classical in the corner. There must have been 100 people present, all of them dressed in shades of black and grey, all of them moving with the careful choreography of those who knew they were being watched. I saw him before anyone told me who he was. He stood near the far windows, separate from the crowd without appearing to distance himself. Tall. Dark hair silvered at the temples. A face that might have been carved from the same stone as this house, all angles and control. He was speaking to two men who leaned toward him with the eager deference of subordinates. But even as he listened, Even as he nodded at whatever they said, his eyes moved across the room with the steady sweep of a man cataloguing threats. Those eyes found me. For a moment, perhaps two, he looked at me the way one might look at an unfamiliar painting. Not with interest, exactly. With assessment. Then he returned his attention to the men beside him, and I was dismissed. "That's him," my father said, his voice low and tight. "Enzo Moretti, the one we owe." I had heard the name, of course. Everyone in this city had heard the name. The Morettis had controlled the eastern seaboard's less legitimate enterprises for 3 generations, and Enzo had inherited the empire a decade ago, when his father died under circumstances that remained conveniently unclear. There were rumours about him. There were always rumours about men like him. That he was ruthless, that he was patient, that people who crossed him disappeared so completely it was as if they had never existed at all. "He doesn't look happy to see us," Margaret observed. "He doesn't look anything," I said. It was true. His face gave away nothing. I had spent years reading people, learning to predict my stepmother's moods from the set of her shoulders, anticipating my father's rages from the rhythm of his breathing. Enzo Moretti was a closed book written in a language I didn't know. A man approached us. Younger than Moretti, but with the same dark hair and careful eyes. "Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Brennan." He nodded at each of them in turn, then let his gaze slide over me without acknowledgement. "Mr. Moretti will see you now." We followed him through the crowd. People parted for us, or rather they parted for the man leading us, their conversations pausing for just a moment before resuming in lower tones. I could feel their eyes on my back, on the dress that didn't fit, on the woman who didn't belong. Enzo Moretti watched us approach. Up close, I could see that he was older than I had first thought. Late 40s, perhaps. There were lines around his eyes and a hardness to his jaw that spoke of years spent making difficult decisions. He wore a black suit that fit him perfectly, and his hands, when they moved, did so with deliberate precision. "Patrick." His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to rise to command attention. "You're late." "Traffic," my father said. The lie was transparent, and everyone present knew it. Moretti's eyes moved to Margaret, dismissed her in a glance, then settled on me. "This is her?" "Yes." My father's hand found my elbow, pushed me forward slightly. "This is Siobhan, my daughter. As we discussed, I'm offering her to you as a gesture of good faith, a sign of my commitment to repaying my debts." I watched Moretti's face as my father spoke. There was no change in his expression, no flicker of emotion to indicate what he thought of this arrangement. He simply looked at me the way one might look at a piece of furniture being delivered, something to be examined for flaws before accepting. "She's not what I expected," he said finally. Margaret laughed, that brittle sound that meant she was enjoying someone else's discomfort. "We did warn you, Mr. Moretti. Patrick's first wife was a plain woman, and Siobhan takes after her. But she's obedient, hard-working. She'll serve whatever purpose you have in mind." I watched Moretti's eyes move to Margaret, watched something in them sharpen just for a moment before smoothing back to blankness. "Will she?" "Of course." My father's grip on my elbow tightened. "Whatever you need. Cooking, cleaning. She's been managing our household for years. She's quite capable." "I see." Moretti looked at me again, looked at the dress that didn't fit, the face that wasn't pretty, the body that wasn't thin. "And what does Siobhan have to say about this arrangement?" The question surprised me. No one had asked me anything since this began. No one had consulted me, explained to me, given me any choice at all. I was property being transferred, and property didn't have opinions. "I understand my father owes you money," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I understand that I'm being offered as payment. I don't know what you intend to do with me, but I imagine it doesn't matter what I think about it." Margaret made a small, distressed sound. My father's grip on my elbow became painful, but Enzo Moretti simply looked at me with those unreadable eyes. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw his lips twitch. "You're right," he said. "It doesn't matter. But I was curious whether you had the courage to say so." He turned to one of the men behind him. "Marco, show Mr. and Mrs. Brennan out. Siobhan will be staying." "Now wait just a moment," Margaret began. "The arrangement has been made." Moretti didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Patrick owes me $2 million. His daughter is collateral until the debt is paid. You may visit her once a month with advance notice and approval. Beyond that, she belongs to me." The words landed like stones in still water. Belongs to me. I had suspected this, of course. Had known since the moment they dressed me in this too small dress and put me in that black car that I was being given away. But hearing it spoken aloud, in that flat, emotionless voice, made it real in a way I hadn't quite been prepared for. My father released my elbow. He didn't look at me. We'll be in touch, Siobhan. Behave yourself." And then they were gone, escorted out by the young man called Marco, and I was alone with Enzo Moretti in a room full of people who pretended not to be watching. "Come with me," he said. I followed him. There was nothing else to do. He led me through the crowd, through a door, down a corridor that grew quieter with every step. The party sounds faded behind us, replaced by the soft click of his shoes on marble floors and the rustle of my ill-fitting dress. Finally, he opened a door and gestured for me to enter. It was a study. Dark wood and leather, bookshelves lining the walls, a massive desk positioned before tall windows that looked out over the night-dark gardens. He closed the door behind us, and the silence that followed was absolute. "Sit." I sat in one of the leather chairs facing the desk. He moved past me, poured something amber from a crystal decanter and placed the glass in front of me before pouring another for himself. "Drink." I looked at the glass but didn't touch it. "What's going to happen to me?" He settled into the chair behind the desk, swirling his own drink without tasting it. "That depends." "On what?" "On you." He leaned back, studying me with those cold, careful eyes. "Your father owes me a significant amount of money. He's been avoiding payment for over a year, making excuses, making promises he can't keep. When I finally demanded resolution, he offered me his daughter. Not his beautiful stepdaughters, mind you. Not the ones with futures and prospects. You." I absorbed this without surprise. "He offered me because he doesn't care what happens to me." "Yes," Moretti's voice was flat. "He offered you because you are, in his words, worth nothing. A burden he was happy to be rid of. His wife suggested that I might use you as a servant, that you were accustomed to hard work and would be useful for cleaning." I felt my face flush, but I kept my voice steady. "And is that what you intend? To make me your maid?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rose, moved around the desk, and came to stand in front of me. I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes, and I saw something there that I couldn't quite identify. Not cruelty, not desire. Something more complex. "Stand up," he said. I stood. My legs trembled slightly, but I locked my knees and kept my face neutral. He walked around me slowly, the way one might walk around a horse at auction, and I felt my flush deepen with shame and anger. "They dressed you in this deliberately," he observed. "The colour washes you out. The fit is wrong. You've been made to look worse than you are." I said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Why didn't you refuse?" The question caught me off guard. "Refuse what?" "Any of it. The dress. The arrangement. Your father's demands. You walked into this house and let yourself be handed over like a piece of luggage. You haven't cried, haven't begged, haven't tried to run. Why?" I met his eyes. "Because crying and begging and running wouldn't change anything. My father owes you money he can't pay. If I refused, you would find another way to collect. Maybe a way that hurt more people. Maybe a way that hurt my father, even though he doesn't deserve my protection. At least this way, I'm the only one who suffers." He was silent for a long moment. Then, "You've thought about this?" I've had 10 years to think about everything. You learn to be practical when you're the person nobody wants. Something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but I caught it because I had trained myself to catch such things. He reached out and touched the fabric of my dress where it pulled across my shoulder, and I held myself very still. "This isn't acceptable," he said. "I'm aware that I'm not—" "The dress." He released the fabric, stepped back. "It's not acceptable. You'll be provided with clothes that fit properly. Tomorrow someone will come to take measurements. Until then, you'll find appropriate nightwear in the room that's been prepared for you." I blinked. This was not what I had expected. "I don't understand." "You're collateral, Miss Brennan. That means you have value whether your father recognizes it or not. Collateral is maintained in good condition. It's treated appropriately. It's not squeezed into ugly dresses and paraded around like a joke." His voice had hardened almost imperceptibly. "Your family may have treated you as worthless. In this house, you will be treated as what you are, a debt that I intend to collect on." It wasn't kindness. I understood that. It was pragmatism, ownership, the same logic that led people to maintain their cars and feed their livestock. But it was also more consideration than I had received in years, and I didn't know what to do with the feeling that rose in my chest. "What will I be doing here?" I asked. "For now, nothing. You'll have a room in the East Wing. You'll take meals with the household staff. You'll stay out of the way and cause no trouble." He moved back behind his desk, effectively dismissing me. "Marco will show you to your quarters." "And after that? After for now?" He looked up. "That depends on your father. If he pays his debt, you'll be returned to him. If he doesn't," he shrugged, a minimal movement that conveyed infinite possibility. "We'll see." The room they gave me was larger than any bedroom I had ever occupied. There was a four-poster bed with white linens, a private bathroom with a deep tub, a closet that could have held 10 times more clothing than I had ever owned. On the bed, laid out with careful precision, was a simple cotton nightgown that looked like it would actually fit. I stood in the center of the room for a long moment, trying to understand what had just happened to me. I had been sold, given away, handed over to a man who was by all accounts a murderer and a criminal. And yet somehow I felt safer here than I had felt in my father's house in years. The thought was absurd, dangerous. I pushed it away and focused on practical matters instead. I removed the terrible dress, let it pool on the floor like a puddle of bad decisions, and put on the nightgown. It fit. It was soft. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a tired woman with sad eyes, but at least I saw someone who looked human. Sleep came eventually. I dreamed of nothing. In the morning, a woman arrived at my door with a breakfast tray. She was middle-aged, efficient, with a face that suggested she had seen everything and had stopped being surprised by any of it. "I'm Mrs. Carbone," she said. "I manage the household. Mr. Moretti has asked me to see to your needs." "My needs," I repeated. "Yes." She set the tray on a small table near the window. "Breakfast. After that, a tailor will be coming to take your measurements. Mr. Moretti was very specific about the clothing. You're to receive nothing too formal, but nothing cheap either. Good quality, comfortable, clothes that fit." I looked at the breakfast tray. There was fresh fruit, eggs, toast, coffee, more food than I typically ate in an entire day. "Why?" I asked. Mrs. Carbone paused in her movements. "Why what? Why is he doing this? He could have put me in a closet somewhere. He could have made me scrub floors. I'm collateral, not a guest. Why am I being treated like this?" She studied me for a moment, and something in her expression softened. "I've worked for Mr. Moretti for 15 years. In that time, I've learned not to question his decisions. But I will tell you this, he does nothing without reason. If he's treating you well, it's because he's decided you deserve to be treated well. That's more than most people can say." The tailor arrived at 10. He was a thin man with nimble fingers and a measuring tape that seemed to move of its own accord. He took my measurements without comment. without the looks of disgust or pity I had grown accustomed to from seamstresses over the years. When he left, he promised that the first set of clothes would be ready by evening. I spent the rest of the day exploring the boundaries of my new cage. The east wing, where my room was located, opened onto a garden that was still dormant from winter. I was permitted to walk there, to sit on the cold stone benches and watch the skeletal trees sway in the wind. I was not permitted to leave the grounds. I was not permitted to enter the west wing, where Moretti's private quarters were located. I was not permitted to speak to anyone about the arrangement that had brought me here. These rules were delivered by Marco, the young man from the night before. He was polite but distant, professional in the way that soldiers are professional. I suspected he would kill me without hesitation if Moretti ordered it. I suspected he would do so without enjoying it, which was perhaps the best one could hope for. Days passed. The clothes arrived simple and well-made, in colours that actually suited my complexion. Soft sweaters and practical trousers, sturdy shoes and warm coats. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't wince when I caught sight of myself in mirrors. I still wasn't beautiful. I would never be beautiful. But I looked like someone who mattered enough to be dressed properly, and that was a kind of revolution all its own. I saw Moretti infrequently. He was busy with whatever business occupied a man like him, gone for days at a time and closeted in meetings when he was home. When we did encounter each other, in hallways or the dining room where I sometimes took my meals, he acknowledged me with a brief nod and nothing more. He didn't speak to me. He didn't look at me the way men sometimes looked at women, with appetite or assessment. He simply noted my existence and moved on. It should have been a relief. It was a relief mostly. But there was also something else, something that felt almost like disappointment, and I buried that feeling deep where it couldn't trouble me. 3 weeks after my arrival, I was in the garden when I heard the child crying. The sound came from beyond the hedge that separated the garden from the staff quarters. It was thin and high, the kind of crying that indicated real distress rather than mere temper. I found myself moving toward it before I had consciously decided to investigate, pushing through the gap in the hedge and into a small courtyard I hadn't known existed. The child was perhaps 4 years old, a girl with dark hair and the kind of face that would be beautiful when she grew older. She was sitting on the cold ground, clutching her ankle and sobbing, and when she saw me, her cries only intensified. "Shh." I knelt beside her, keeping my voice low and calm. "Shh, it's all right. I'm not going to hurt you. What happened?" "I fell," she managed between sobs. "I was climbing, and I fell, and my ankle hurts. And I can't find Maria, and—" "All right." I examined the ankle as gently as I could. It was swelling, but I didn't think it was broken. "All right, let's get you inside. Can you put your arms around my neck?" She looked at me with enormous dark eyes, so like Moretti's that I understood immediately who she was. "You're the lady who lives in the garden," she said. "Maria said I'm not supposed to talk to you." "Well, Maria isn't here right now, and your ankle needs ice. So what do you say we bend the rules just this once?" The ghost of a smile crossed her face. She lifted her arms and I gathered her up, careful of the injured ankle, and carried her back through the hedge and into the main house. I found Mrs. Carbone in the kitchen. Her expression when she saw me carrying the child was complicated. Surprise, concern, something that might have been approval. "She fell," I explained. "I think it's just a sprain, but she needs ice, and someone should probably look at it properly." "Lucia." Mrs. Carbone took the child from me with practiced ease. "How many times have I told you not to climb on the wall? Where is Maria?" "I don't know." Lucia had stopped crying, but her face was still pale. "She was supposed to be watching me, but then she went to talk to one of the gardeners, and I got bored and—" "We'll discuss Maria later." Mrs. Carbone fixed me with a look. "Thank you, Miss Brennan. I'll take it from here." I nodded and started to leave, but a small voice stopped me. "Wait!" Lucia was reaching toward me. What's your name? Will you come see me later? Will you? Later, Mrs. Carbone said firmly. After the doctor looks at your ankle and after you've rested. If Miss Brennan wants to visit, she may, but only if you're good. I retreated to my room and didn't think about it again until evening, when there was a knock at my door. It was Marco, his face as expressionless as ever. Mr. Moretti would like to see you in his study. My heart lurched, though I wasn't sure why. I had done nothing wrong. I had helped a child who had fallen. Surely that wasn't a violation of any rule. But as I followed Marco down the now familiar hallways, I felt a growing dread that I couldn't quite explain. Moretti was standing by the window when I entered, his back to the door. He didn't turn when I came in, and for a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire in the grate. "Close the door," he said finally. I closed it. "Mrs. Carbone tells me you found my daughter in the courtyard this afternoon, that you carried her to the kitchen and saw to it that she received medical attention." "Yes." I kept my voice neutral. She had fallen. She was hurt. I did what anyone would do. Now he turned. In the firelight, his face was all shadows and hard angles, impossible to read. "You're not anyone. You're collateral, property. You could have left her there. You could have pretended not to hear her. Instead, you helped her. She's a child. Her being hurt was more important than whatever I am." He moved toward me, and I held my ground because I had learned years ago that showing fear only made things worse. He stopped close enough that I could have touched him, close enough that I could smell his cologne and see the faint grey in his hair. "Maria has been dismissed," he said. "She was supposed to be watching Lucia. She wasn't. My daughter could have been seriously injured because of her negligence." "That seems harsh." "Does it?" His eyes were dark, fathomless. "My daughter is the only thing in this world that I care about, Miss Brennan. The only thing. People who fail to protect her do not get second chances." I absorbed this in silence. There was something in his voice that I recognized, something that lay beneath the coldness and the control. It was the sound of a man who loved something so fiercely that it terrified him. "Mrs. Carbone mentioned that you have experience with childcare," he continued, "that you helped raise your stepsisters when they were young." I did what was asked of me. "Lucia needs someone to look after her, someone trustworthy, someone who would put her safety above their own comfort or convenience." He paused. "I'm offering you the position." I stared at him. "You want me to be your daughter's nanny?" "I want you to be responsible for her well-being when I'm not here, which is often. You would have access to more of the house. You would take your meals with her. You would be essentially a companion rather than a prisoner. But I would still be collateral. I would still belong to you." "Yes." He didn't flinch from the word. "Until your father pays his debt, you belong to me. But there are different ways of belonging, different levels of comfort. This would be an improvement in your circumstances." I thought about the past 3 weeks, the quiet room, the garden walks, the meals eaten alone. And I thought about the child with the dark eyes, the one who had smiled at me through her tears. "Why me?" I asked. "You must have dozens of people who could do this job. People you trust. People who've been with you for years." "I do. But Lucia asked for you specifically. She described you as the nice lady from the garden who isn't afraid of anything. She's a good judge of character, better than most adults." Something warm bloomed in my chest, and I quickly suppressed it. "And if I refuse?" "Then you go back to your room and your garden walks and your solitary meals. Nothing changes. I won't punish you for declining." He stepped back, giving me space. "The choice is yours, Miss Brennan. It's perhaps the only choice you'll have while you're here. I suggest you think carefully before you make it." I didn't need to think. I had spent 10 years being invisible, being unwanted, being the person nobody chose. A child had chosen me. A child had asked for me by name. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll take care of your daughter." And that was how, in the household of a man I had been given to as payment for my father's debts, I began to feel something I had almost forgotten existed, a sense of purpose. Lucia Moretti was, I quickly discovered, a force of nature. She was curious about everything, fearless in ways that made my heart stop, and possessed of an imagination that could spin entire worlds out of thin air. She wanted to know why the sky was blue and how birds flew and what happened to people when they died. She wanted to climb every tree on the estate and swim in the fountain despite the February cold, and befriend the kitchen cat who had never befriended anyone in its miserable life. She was also, beneath all that energy, deeply lonely. "My mama went away," she told me matter-of-factly one afternoon as we sat in the library looking at picture books. "When I was little. Papa says she's not coming back." "That must be hard," I said carefully. "Sometimes." She turned a page, considering. "But Papa says that some people aren't made for staying. He says it's not my fault that she left. He says that the people who stay are the ones who matter." She looked up at me with those dark eyes that were so much like her father's. "Are you going to stay?" The question caught me off guard. I'm not sure. I suppose that depends on things I can't control." "Like what?" "Like whether my father pays his debts. Like whether your father decides to let me go." She considered this seriously. "I don't want you to go." "Well?" I smoothed her hair back from her face, a gesture I hadn't planned but which felt entirely natural. "That's very kind." "It's not kind, it's true." She turned back to her book. "You're the first person who doesn't treat me like I'm made of glass. Everyone else is scared of Papa, so they're scared of me too. But you're not scared of anything." She was wrong about that. I was scared of plenty of things. But I was learning, slowly, that fear didn't have to be the same as surrender. Weeks became months. Spring arrived, tentative at first, and then with increasing confidence, and the garden transformed from dormancy to life. I watched the flowers bloom with Lucia, taught her the names of plants and birds, supervised her increasingly daring climbing expeditions, and her ongoing campaign to win over the kitchen cat. We read together every afternoon, chapter books now that she had tired of pictures, and I discovered that she had a particular affinity for stories about brave girls who went on adventures. "Why don't you go on adventures?" she asked me once. "I am on an adventure," I told her. "This is it. Being here, watching you grow, that's my adventure." She wrinkled her nose. "That doesn't sound very adventurous." "The best adventures are the ones that happen quietly, the ones where you don't realize anything important is happening until you look back and see how far you've come." Enzo Moretti continued to be a presence felt more than seen. He left early and returned. Late, and when he was home, he was usually closeted with his men or making phone calls in languages I didn't understand. But he always made time for Lucia. Every evening, without fail, he came to her room to say goodnight. And often I would find them curled together on her bed, him reading to her in a voice so different from his usual coldness that I sometimes wondered if he was the same man at all. Sometimes when he passed me in the hallways, he would pause, ask how Lucia was doing, ask if we needed anything. His eyes would hold mine for just a moment longer than necessary, and then he would move on, and I would stand there trying to understand what had just happened. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself he was simply checking on his investment, making sure his collateral was being maintained in good condition. I told myself the warmth I felt when he looked at me was a symptom of isolation, of touch starvation, of the basic human need to be seen. But at night, alone in my room, I sometimes caught myself thinking about his hands, about his voice, about the way his face transformed when he spoke to his daughter. I was being foolish. I knew that. And so I buried those thoughts the way I had learned to bury everything else, deep down where they couldn't cause trouble. 4 months into my new role, my father came to visit. I hadn't seen him since the night he delivered me to Moretti like a package with the wrong address. He looked older, thinner, with a new nervousness in his movements that suggested things had not been going well. Margaret was not with him. Siobhan. He kissed my cheek, a perfunctory gesture that meant nothing. You look well. I am well. I kept my voice neutral. How is business? His face tightened. We're making progress. I've secured some new contracts. Another few months, maybe 6, and I should be able to start paying back what I owe. 6 months. I turned the number over in my mind, unsure how to feel about it. 6. Months ago, I would have counted the days until my freedom. Now the word freedom felt strange and unfamiliar, like a language I had once spoken but had begun to forget. That's good news, I said. Yes, it is. He glanced around the sitting room where we had been placed for our visit, taking in the expensive furnishings and tasteful art. They're treating you well, then? Moretti isn't... He hasn't touched me, if that's what you're asking. I'm the nanny to his daughter. That's all. Relief flickered across his face, followed by something more complicated. His daughter. Yes, I'd heard about that. Quite an improvement from your previous situation. I said nothing. The thing is, Siobhan, I was hoping... He tugged at his collar, a nervous habit I remembered from childhood. I was hoping you might be able to help. Put in a good word for me. You're in Moretti's household now. You must have some influence. I have no influence. My voice was flat. I'm collateral, father. Property. I do what I'm told, and I stay out of the way, and I pray that you eventually pay your debts so I can leave. But surely... No. I stood. This visit is over. I hope your business continues to improve. Please give Margaret my regards. He opened his mouth to argue, but the door opened and Marco appeared, and my father's protest died in his throat. He left without another word, and I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the drive and felt nothing at all. That night there was a knock at my door. It was late, well past midnight, and I answered it in my nightgown because I was too tired to bother with a robe. Enzo Moretti stood in the hallway. I heard about your father's visit, he said without preamble. News travels fast. In this house, yes? He didn't move to enter, simply stood there in the doorway with his hands clasped behind his back. Are you all right? The question was unexpected. I'm fine. You don't look fine. His eyes moved over my face, assessing in that way he had. You look like someone who has just been reminded of something painful. My father is a painful subject. So I gathered. A pause. For what it's worth, his timeline is optimistic. Based on my assessment of his business prospects, it will be at least a year before he can begin repaying what he owes. Probably longer. A year. Possibly longer. 12 months or more in this house, with this child, with this man who saw everything and gave away nothing. Thank you for telling me, I said. You deserve to know the truth of your situation. He stepped back, preparing to leave. Get some sleep, Miss Brennan. Lucia has been planning an expedition to the pond tomorrow. She'll want you well rested. He was gone before I could respond. Summer came, then autumn, and the expedition to the pond became a weekly tradition. Lucia caught frogs and collected leaves and asked endless questions about the natural world that I frequently couldn't answer. We started a small garden of our own near the east wing, planted with vegetables and herbs that she could tend and harvest. She gave names to all the crows that visited the estate and left offerings of breadcrumbs on the windowsills. And slowly, so slowly that I almost didn't notice it happening, I began to feel something that might have been happiness. It wasn't the dramatic, sweeping happiness of fairy tales. It was smaller than that, quieter. It was the happiness of waking up in a comfortable bed in a room that felt like mine, of eating breakfast with a child who genuinely wanted my company, of walking through gardens that were beautiful and tended and full of life, of knowing for the first time in my adult life that I was valued by someone. even if that someone was only 4 years old. But there was also something else, something I tried very hard not to acknowledge. Enzo Moretti had begun joining us for dinner, not every night, but often enough that it had become a pattern. He would appear in the informal dining room where Lucia and I took our meals, sit down at the head of the table, and eat with us as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He asked Lucia about her day, listened to her rambling stories with apparent interest, and occasionally asked me questions about my background, my education, the years I had spent as an unofficial servant in my father's house. I answered carefully, revealing only what I had to, but he was a skilled interrogator, and I found myself telling him things I had never told anyone. About my mother's death when I was 15, about my father's quick remarriage, and the stepsisters who treated me as competition to be crushed rather than family to be welcomed, about the years of small cruelties that had worn me down until I barely remembered what it felt like to be treated with kindness. He listened without judgment, without pity. And sometimes when I finished speaking, he would look at me with something in his eyes that I couldn't quite name, and I would feel my heart turn over in my chest like a fish trying to swim upstream. It was dangerous, what was happening to me. I knew that. He was still who he was, a criminal, a killer, a man who had bought me from my father like livestock at auction. The kindness he showed me was the kindness of an owner to a pet, nothing more. If I forgot that, I would only hurt myself in the end. But the heart doesn't listen to reason. I had learned that a long time ago. The first time I saved his life, it was almost an accident. We were in the city for a charity event, a rare excursion that Moretti had agreed to because the cause, children's hospitals, was one of the few things that could make him engage with respectable society. Lucia had been left at home with Mrs. Carbone, but I had been brought along because Moretti said he needed someone who could carry on a conversation that didn't revolve around illegal activities. "Consider it part of your duties," he had said when I protested. "Lucia has been talking about teaching you to be more social. This is practice." The event was at a grand hotel downtown, all crystal and candlelight, and people wearing clothes that cost more than my father's yearly income. I wore a dress that Moretti had commissioned specially for the occasion, deep green silk that actually flattered my figure, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the ugliest woman in the room. I was standing near the refreshment table, eating a canapé and watching Moretti work the crowd, when I saw the waiter. There was nothing particularly memorable about him. Average height, average build, the kind of face that disappeared into the background. But he was moving toward Moretti with a particular intensity, and his hand was in his pocket. And something about the set of his shoulders made my instincts scream. I moved without thinking, crossed the room in quick strides, arrived at Moretti's side, just as the waiter was reaching for whatever was in his pocket. I stumbled into them both, a clumsy collision that knocked Moretti sideways and sent the waiter's hand flying out of his pocket empty. "I'm so sorry," I said loudly, clutching Moretti's arm as if to steady myself. "I'm so clumsy. I tripped on my dress. I'm terribly sorry." The waiter was gone, vanished into the crowd like smoke, and Moretti was looking down at me with those dark eyes that missed nothing. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "Fine. I thought I saw—" "I know what you saw." His hand closed over mine where it gripped his arm. "Come with me." He led me out of the ballroom, through a service corridor into an empty conference room. Two of his men appeared as if summoned, and he spoke to them in rapid Italian before turning back to me. "The waiter. Describe him." I did, as best I could. Height, build, hair colour, the way he had moved. When I finished, Moretti nodded and his men departed. "He had a knife in his pocket," Moretti said. "I saw the outline when you knocked into him. If you hadn't intervened, I would likely be bleeding on the ballroom floor right now." I absorbed this information. Why would someone want to kill you? Many reasons. He moved closer and I was suddenly very aware of how alone we were. how quiet this room was compared to the noise of the party beyond. But that's not what concerns me at the moment. What concerns you? You. His hand came up, touched my face. His fingers were warm and gentle, and I couldn't breathe. You threw yourself between me and a man with a knife. You didn't even hesitate. Why? I don't know. It was the truth. I saw him reaching for something, and I just moved. You could have been killed. I know. You didn't know he had a knife. You didn't know I was the target. You acted on instinct, on a possibility, on a feeling that something was wrong. He was so close now that I could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. That's not the behavior of a woman who considers herself property, Miss Brennan. That's the behavior of someone who cares whether I live or die. I should have denied it, should have stepped back, created distance, reminded both of us of what I was and what I wasn't. Instead, I heard myself say, would it be so terrible if I did? His hand slid from my face to the back of my neck, warm and heavy. No, he said, it wouldn't be terrible at all. And then he kissed me. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not a tentative exploration. It was a claiming, fierce and overwhelming, and I kissed him back with a hunger I hadn't known I possessed. My hands fisted in his jacket, and his arms came around me, and for one long, perfect moment nothing else existed except this. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathing hard. We should go back, he said. His voice was rough, uneven. Before someone comes looking for us. Yes, I didn't move. We should. He looked at me. We, for a long moment. Then he kissed me again. Softer this time. Almost tender. We will continue this conversation later. Later came 3 days after, when Lucia was asleep and the house was quiet and I was sitting in the library reading a book I had stopped seeing 2 chapters ago. The door opened and Moretti appeared, and the look on his face made my heart pound. I've been trying to stay away, he said without preamble. I've been telling myself all the reasons this is a bad idea. You're my hostage. I own you. Any relationship between us would be built on a foundation of power imbalance that can never be fully resolved. That's all true, I agreed. And yet, he closed the door behind him. I can't stop thinking about you, about your face when you look at my daughter, about your voice when you tell her stories, about the way you saved my life without a moment's hesitation, as if your own safety meant nothing. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopped in front of my chair. About how you taste. I stood, met his eyes. I've been trying to stay away too, telling myself it's just proximity, just isolation, just the natural response to being treated kindly after years of cruelty. And I was lying to myself. He kissed me again. This time there was no ballroom waiting beyond the door. No pretense of urgency. He kissed me like he had all the time in the world, like I was something precious he had discovered and intended to explore thoroughly, like I was the opposite of everything my father and stepmother had always told me I was. When we finally parted, he led me to the sofa and sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. This doesn't change your situation, he said quietly. Legally, you're still collateral. If your father pays his debt, you'll be free to leave. I won't hold you against your will. I know. But if you choose to stay... He took my hand, turned it over, pressed a kiss to my palm. I would like you to stay. As what? Your nanny? Your hostage? Your... As mine. He met my eyes. As whatever you want to be. We can figure out the details later. But I want you to know that you have a place here. Not because your father owes me money, because I want you here, because Lucia wants you here, because this house has been a colder place since my wife left. And you, he shook his head. You've made it feel like something it hasn't felt like in years. What's that? Like a home. I thought about the years I had spent in my father's house, invisible and unwanted. I thought about the life I might have had if my mother hadn't died, if my father hadn't remarried, if I had been born beautiful or thin or easy to love. I thought about all the dreams I had abandoned along the way, all the pieces of myself I had buried just to survive. And then I thought about the way Lucia's face lit up when I came into a room, about the garden we had built together, about the small, quiet moments of happiness that had accumulated over the past months like coins in a jar. "I'll stay," I said. "Not because I have to, because I want to." He smiled then, a real smile, the kind that transformed his entire face. "Then stay." What followed was not a fairy tale. Fairy tales are simple and life is complicated, and Enzo Moretti was perhaps the most complicated man I had ever known. There were nights when he came home covered in blood that I knew wasn't his, and I didn't ask questions because I understood the answers would only make things harder. There were days when men appeared at the estate with urgent news and hard faces, and I kept Lucia close and waited for whatever storm was coming. There were moments when I looked at him and saw the coldness that lived beneath the warmth, the killer that coexisted with the father, and I had to make peace with both. But there were also mornings when I woke to find him watching me, tracing patterns on my skin with his fingertips, afternoons when we walked together through the garden while Lucia ran ahead, chasing butterflies and collecting stones. Evenings when we sat together in the library, reading in companionable silence, and I felt a contentment so profound it was almost frightening. He never apologized for what he was. He never pretended to be something different. He simply was himself, fully and unapologetically, and he made space for me to be myself in return. "You're not what I expected," he said one night, months later, as we lay tangled together in his bed. "When your father offered you, I assumed you would be a burden to be managed, a liability. At best, a servant. I didn't expect—" He trailed off, searching for words. "Didn't expect what?" "This." He gestured at the space between us, at the intimacy we had built. "You, someone who sees exactly what I am and doesn't look away. Someone who protects my daughter as fiercely as I would. Someone who makes me want to be—" He paused. "Not better. That's not quite right. Just more. More present. More human." I touched his face, traced the hard line of his jaw. "You've always been human. You just forgot for a while." The day my father finally paid his debt, I was in the garden with Lucia, teaching her how to deadhead roses. Marco appeared at the gate, his face as expressionless as ever. "Miss Brennan, Mr. Moretti would like to see you in his study." I set down my garden shears and kissed Lucia's forehead. "I'll be back soon. Practice your cuts like I showed you." Moretti was standing behind his desk when I entered, just as he had been that first night, almost 2 years ago now. But everything else was different. His posture was tense, his jaw tight, and when he looked at me, there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. "Your father has transferred the final payment," he said. "As of this afternoon, his debt is cleared. You're free." Free. The word felt strange in my mouth, like a food I had forgotten the taste of. "I see. Your room has been prepared for your departure. Your clothes, your belongings, everything you've accumulated during your time here. It's all been packed and will be delivered wherever you choose to go." He spoke quickly, almost mechanically, as if reciting information from a script. "I've also set up an account in your name. Compensation for your time. It's not payment for anything specific, just funds to help you establish yourself, find a place to live, start over." "Enzo." He stopped, looked at me, and I saw beneath all that control, all that coldness, a vulnerability so raw it took my breath away. "I'm not leaving," I said. "You don't have to stay, you're not obligated. Whatever we've built here, it was built on an unequal foundation. I would understand if you wanted to—" "I'm not leaving." I crossed the room, took his face in my hands, made him look at me. "I told you months ago that I was staying because I wanted to. That hasn't changed. I love your daughter. I love this house. I love the life we've built here." I took a breath. "And I love you. Even though you're impossible and controlling and you do terrible things and you've never once said the words back. I love you anyway. He was quiet for a long moment. Then his arms came around me, pulled me close, held me with a fierceness that said more than words ever could. I never said it because I didn't think I had the right, he said against my hair. You were mine by circumstance, not by choice. If I said it, I was afraid it would sound like another way of owning you. And now? He pulled back, met my eyes. Now you're here by choice. Now you're free to leave whenever you want. So now I can say it and know that it means something. He took my face in his hands the way I had taken his. I love you. Not because you saved my daughter, or saved my life, or made my house feel like a home. I love you because you're exactly who you are, and who you are is extraordinary. I kissed him then, and he kissed me back, and somewhere in the house I could hear Lucia singing to herself in the garden, and everything felt right. We were married 6 months later in a small ceremony in the garden we had built together. Lucia was the flower girl. Mrs. Carbone cried. My father was not invited. I became Siobhan Moretti, though in many ways I had stopped being Siobhan Brennan long before the wedding. The woman my father had sold like unwanted furniture was gone. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who had found value not because a man had given it to her, but because she had recognized it in herself. The world outside our gates remained complicated. There were still men with knives and grudges, still threats to be assessed and neutralized, still the dark machinery of Enzo's empire turning in the background. I never pretended not to see it. I simply made peace with the fact that love doesn't require perfection, and that sometimes the most moral choice is to protect the people you love, even when the methods are ugly. Lucia grew tall and smart and brave, just as I had known she would. She never forgot that I was the lady from the garden who wasn't afraid of anything, and she tried to live up to that image even when I confessed that I had been afraid of quite a lot, actually. I had just learned not to show it. That's even better, she said. Being brave when you're scared is harder than being brave when you're not. She was right. She was always right about the things that mattered. And Enzo, my husband, my partner, the father of the 2 children we would eventually have together, never stopped looking at me the way he had that first night in the ballroom when I threw myself between him and a stranger with a knife. Like I was something remarkable. Like I was exactly where I belonged. I should thank your father someday, he said once, late at night, when we were curled together in our bed and the house was quiet around us. For what? For being such a fool. For not seeing what he had. For giving you to me when he could have kept you. He pressed a kiss to my hair. His loss was my gain. I just wish he knew how much. I thought about Patrick Brennan, about the man who had traded me away without a second thought, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not grief, not even satisfaction at his loss, just nothing. He had made his choices. I had made mine. And mine had led me here, to this house, this family, this life I had never dared to imagine for myself. He wouldn't understand even if you told him, I said. He never saw me. He never will. No. Enzo's arms tightened around me. But I see you, and I will never stop. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. In the end, that was everything.